Sometimes it seemed to Riley that the world kept changing its colors around her. Just like today, a dark sky stretched beyond her window while golden leaves from what had once been a vibrant fall crafted a striking scene of despair. Everything now felt as dreary as her own mood. Before that awful phone call, she had been certain she was off on an adventure packed with relaxation at her grandparents' house. But now, this trip had morphed into an almost unbearably dull vacation at Grandma's place. No chance she'd accept that. One person, the very last one she'd ever want to see, awaited her there. "Mom, I'm going back home," she croaked into the phone, hitting redial on the last call. "You know exactly how I feel about him." "You were only a kid, Riley." "There's no need to blow it out of proportion," her mom replied. They always said that after what happened 5 years ago, but Riley knew it was far bigger than they admitted. She tossed the phone onto the small table with a grimace and glared out the window. Some trees bore crimson leaves now, as if nature itself echoed her fury. Lying back on the bed, Riley fixed her eyes on the ceiling, her thoughts drifting to that moment nearly 5 years earlier. She had first met her younger cousin, Ethan, back then. At 9 years old, she was quick to be amazed and slow to be reasoned with. Even at that age, she sensed the adults were mistaken. Everyone misjudged him. They claimed Ethan had a condition, but Riley saw the truth. She could spot his act and catch that sharp, intentional glint in his gaze. The adults insisted Ethan had autism, and on the surface, it might seem plausible. Some things didn't register with him, and he often missed the gist of what people said. He avoided eye contact, shrank from touch, stuck to familiar routes, and performed repetitive tasks. Yet Riley was convinced he did it deliberately. That day, when he was 5, he pushed her off the porch steps at their old house. They had been playing together, and she was warning her sick little cousin not to climb too high. Ethan screamed and shoved her hard in the chest. She landed in the dirt below, jarring her elbow painfully as she fell. Everyone assumed that fall was what she fixated on. An autistic child might lash out in a rage, they reasoned. But that wasn't what haunted Riley, no matter how much they tried to convince her otherwise. Afterward, he changed. He began locking eyes with her, piercing right through to her core. That clear, focused stare spoke louder than anything else could. Nightmares started plaguing her, filled with soft, sneaky whispers and the groan of floorboards. Worse still, Ethan began trailing her. He'd sit silently beside Grandma, mouthing words, trembling as he fidgeted with his bony fingers, then dart a glance her way that turned her stomach. The most chilling part came when he'd look just beyond her, as if someone, or something, hovered so near it could almost brush against her. She feared him and dreaded facing the fact that what she had dismissed as a childish nightmare might be the stark reality. But perhaps it would all turn out fine. Maybe confronting her deepest fear would prove it was just her imagination running wild. When the train rolled into the station, no one greeted her. Lugging her suitcase behind her, Riley braced herself for the sappy family scene ahead, relatives gushing over him with praise like, "What a great kid he is." Sure enough, that's how it went. At the doorstep, she flinched as her gaze fell on a wheelchair where a slightly older Ethan sat. He hadn't changed much, though. He still seemed stuck in a child's frame, his thin, wiry limbs splaying out like some strange creature, Riley mused as she quietly placed her suitcase in the hall. The noise drew Grandma Helen out. "Sweetie, why are you here so early? We thought you'd arrive in 2 hours." "I could wait at the station for a couple hours," Riley shot back, slipping off her fall boots. A tattered maple leaf clung to the sole of her left one, its edges jagged and spread out. "Don't talk nonsense." Grandma Helen bustled around her, ushering her inside. "Hand me your bag, I'll take it. Go say hello to Ethan." Mustering her nerve, Riley sidestepped the wheelchair, watching him cautiously. His face remained vacant as always. Pale blue, nearly white eyes flicked around, grazing the walls without settling anywhere. "Hey," she murmured, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, rocking back and forth sharply. "He's quiet, naturally," Grandma sighed. "But he gets you. Tell him about your school break." Want something to eat? Riley had zero plans to sit and chat with Ethan like everything was normal. She muttered something vague about needing the bathroom and slipped into the house's dim interior. Dodging him in the 3 rooms of this old home would be tough, but she figured she'd manage somehow. If it got bad, she could beg to leave in a couple days. Usually, she stayed with her grandparents for 1 or even 2 weeks. After washing her hands and staring into the mirror for a while, Riley silently rehearsed a pep talk, telling herself she ought to respect the poor, sick boy and lend a hand where she could. But not like this. Life was hard enough for Ethan and his parents without her jumping at shadows or whispering behind their backs. She wiped her nose and strode back to the hall, searching for the wheelchair. It was parked in the kitchen now. Ethan sat calmly, gazing out the window at the drifting leaves. "Gran," Riley called softly. "Oh, he enjoys watching the fall in silence," Grandma replied, moving something on the counter while she poked through cabinets. Riley turned her head and froze. Her suitcase lay on the couch, unzipped and appended, as if someone had rummaged through it. "Who did that?" She swallowed hard, afraid of the answer. As she sorted her things, she peeked into the living room where Grandma's voice mingled with Grandpa Joe's muttering. He had just returned. For nearly 3 hours, Riley had sprawled there, lost in melancholy songs on her phone, wondering if she was letting her mind turn against her. "Oh, Riley, Grandpa's here with us," Grandma said, settling on the couch while everyone hovered around Ethan. He just stared upward, eyes roaming the ceiling. There was something eerie in it, his fragile, quivering form and those strange, throaty sounds he let out. Was she the only one who saw it? Or did they notice and just chalk it up to understanding? "Let me help," Riley offered with a weary sigh. "What can I do?" "Come over here," Grandma Helen motioned. She tugged off Ethan's loose gray shirt and handed Riley a cloth. "Wipe him down." Riley dipped it into a basin of soapy water, her trembling hands sliding it across his skin. Ethan kept muttering, his eyes wandering aimlessly. "Good work," Grandpa Joe said, giving her shoulder a pat. "He's shy, you know. Takes him time to warm up to people. He might still recognize you." Riley had no doubt about that. She already knew calm was out of reach. But when Ethan's damp hand latched onto her forearm, she let out a scream. "Easy now, easy," the adults hurried to soothe him as he cried out and convulsed. "Hush, Ethan, you're okay." Riley stepped back, gripping her arm, staring at them in disbelief. Didn't they see something was wrong? Red marks bloomed where his nails had scratched her. Grandpa Joe guided her out of the room, leaving Grandma to take over. "He got startled. Doesn't know you yet," he said. "He knows me perfectly well," Riley thought, still cradling her stinging arm, though she said aloud, "I got scared too." "Sit in the kitchen," Grandpa said, pulling out a chair before digging into the lowest cabinet. "This calls for some disinfection," he chuckled, producing 2 shot glasses. "Who treats cuts with wine?" "We drink it instead," he grinned. "Don't tell Grandma." They didn't laugh long. Too soon for that, Riley thought. With her nerves, staying sharp was wiser. She'd seen how alcohol warped people's minds, and knew what she'd imagine next. "What are you two doing?" Grandma poked her head in. "Joe, you old goof. Drinking with a kid around?" "Just raising a glass to her visit," Grandpa said, nudging a shot glass toward her. "You made it, pure grape juice." Riley smirked at their banter. The real terror lurked in the next room, and odd noises from there jolted her back to reality. Grandma started to rise, but Grandpa settled her down and headed into the shadowy hall himself. "Poor kid," Grandma murmured, propping her head on her hand. "Things weren't so rough when he was younger. Age spares no one." Riley shrugged after a quiet moment. "Yeah, it's tough. Was he born that way?" Grandma flinched slightly but glanced around before answering. "Your Aunt Linda couldn't have kids for ages. She wore out every church pew praying, and nothing came of it. Then she told the devil she'd give anything for a son. Next thing you know, she was pregnant." "She whispered it?" Riley asked. More or less, Grandma nodded, sipping another shot. But when he came along, it's like the devil showed up to collect. Knocking, banging, demanding something. Linda moved away, had the place blessed. A priest stops by every day now. She didn't give up anything, so I guess the devil cursed her. Ethan started fading, seeing things from the other side. Don't mind me, Grandma added, waving a hand. We all hunt for reasons in random, unfair messes. It's simpler to point at the devil than accept no one's safe from this stuff. Riley gazed at her plate, pondering Aunt Linda's cruel lot, yearning for a child, finally getting one, only to watch him waste away in torment for years. No chance she was ready to even consider kids of her own. Why are you both so down? Grandpa Joe sat down and launched into a story so old Riley felt she'd heard it 1,000 times. She yawned, and they urged her to bed. A shiver ran through her, she knew why. Sleeping in the same house as Ethan, even in different rooms, spooked her. She rushed through a shower, worn out from the trip. The day had drained her emotionally. It dawned on her that slapping a mystical excuse on Ethan's actions was easier than facing the brutal facts. She reached to shut off the water when the lights cut out. A faint glow from the kitchen window calmed her. It was likely just a dead bulb, she reasoned. Grandpa, she called hoarsely, but no one answered. She turned, heart sinking, and faced a ghastly shadow. A sickening wave of decay and grime stung her nose, and she screamed at its hollow eye sockets. What's with the yelling? Grandma asked, lighting a match and staring at her trembling granddaughter. My glasses caught the light, your eyes aren't adjusted. But that smell? Lord, kids these days, she muttered. Riley scrunched her nose. Old folks' breath wasn't great, but this was beyond that. With nerves this frayed, she'd be gray-haired by week's end. Afraid of every squeak and shadow. It turned out the wiring was faulty. The lights were out not only in the bathroom but also in her grandparents' bedroom. Riley gave a wry smirk. By every horror trope, she should have been the one trapped in the dark, terrified of a chair with a blanket slung over it. They tucked her into bed, and she cherished those warm, familiar moments. She traced the wallpaper's design with her finger, slowly slipping into sleep. Dreams of stars and the moon filled her mind, with her bouncing across its surface in a spacesuit, delighting in the lighter gravity. A scraping sound yanked her awake. Something scratched, and it sounded large, drawing nearer. In the nightlight's faint glow, she glimpsed the first shadow. She scrambled back across the rug and saw Ethan crawling toward her, dragging himself with hooked fingers. The scraping persisted, floorboards groaning and clothes rustling. Now she heard him muttering, loud and steady, as if straining to yell. Maybe he needs help? Did he fall? Her eyes flew open, and she nearly screamed, but the sound stuck in her throat. He clutched at her bed. Drool dripped from his gaping mouth, and tears streamed from his eyes, like a monster lurked inside him. His mouth seized her attention, so close to her leg she feared he'd bite. Hauling himself up on thin arms, Ethan grabbed her shoulder. He howled, clawing at the air, snagging her loose hair with those crooked fingers and pulling hard. Let go! Pain jolted Riley alert. Stop it! Grandma's sharp words cut through. Grandpa rushed in first, scooping Ethan up under his arms like a toy and heaving him onto his shoulder. Up to that point, Grandpa had struck Riley as feeble, but though Ethan was scrawny, he wasn't light as a feather. Grandma Helen darted out from beside Grandpa, inspecting Riley and holding her shoulders. What happened? She asked, her voice louder than necessary. What did he do? Did he say something? What could he say? Riley sobbed, struggling to break free. He just moaned nonsense. He's unhinged. He belongs in a hospital, strapped down. Grandma let out a breath and stroked her head gently. It's all right, these things happen. She stood up, fluffing the pillow and smoothing the blanket. He fell and needed help. Don't be afraid, it's okay. Riley's tears halted from sheer shock. What just happened? She wiped her nose and tried to stand, but Grandma held her arm firmly. I'll get you a tissue, she said, stepping away. Wait. Grandpa Joe appeared from the hall, his tall figure locking the door with a click. Kiddo, don't fret. What did he say to you? Say what? Riley frowned and shook her head. Nothing? Well, good, Grandpa said, clapping his hands. Time to sleep then, dawn's not far off. Riley pulled the blanket up higher and glanced at the bedside clock, 11 at night. Dawn's near? She lay still, staring into the hall, too scared to budge. A voice murmured in her head, but she brushed it aside, lips tight. Strange sounds drifted from the corridor again, though they didn't come closer this time. She couldn't imagine just throwing open the window and running. It was 5 feet away, beyond the rug, an old chair, and a table with a sewing machine. Easing her feet down a couple inches, Riley flinched and yanked them back under the blanket. She could have sworn something scratched beneath the bed. Stop it, she yelled in her mind. It was absurd, yet she tugged the covers higher. Could a childish fear of something grabbing her leg really come true? After Ethan's crawling, everything seemed menacing, as if fear lingered in the air. Taking a deep breath, she swung her legs down, toes pressing into the rough rug. She wouldn't let panic win and bolted to the window, glancing back at the hall. Something still shuffled there. Maybe Grandma or Grandpa tending to things? As she fumbled with the curtains, a knock joined in. Someone hammered in the hall, not just at a door but as if they'd smash a wall down. Her eyes widened at the glass, catching her reflection, wild-haired and frightened. Behind her stood a crumpled shape. She scanned every item, heart racing, then turned to face it. It was closer now, peering at her with the same empty sockets she'd seen in the bathroom. It stood still, just watching, as if intrigued by her. Then it surged forward, reeking of decay, dead leaves, and rotten eggs. Voices tore through the quiet night, the pounding grew unbearable, and her body locked up. Darkness flooded her sight. Riley jolted awake in bed, gasping for air. Across the room, in the kitchen, Ethan sat in his wheelchair, muttering and rocking. She clutched her head, struggling to make sense of it all, and wondered, had it been a dream? Was she losing her mind? She needed to get home. Not one more day here with Ethan and these old folks. Why had she come at all? Angry tears rolled down her cheeks. Even if dawn had arrived, it didn't erase the night's horror. She jammed her feet into slippers and dashed to the bathroom. At the doorway, she stopped cold, staring at a flipped rug with a dark, sticky stain. She crouched, touching the wet spot, and looked away just as Grandma emerged, holding a mug. "What's there, Riley?" Grandma Helen asked with a smile. "Drop something? An earring?" Riley blurted out a reply, her eyes falling to the rug. The stain had vanished. "Clumsy girl," Grandma said, shaking her head. "Want some juice?" Grandpa's in the cellar, grabbing a jar I canned last summer. What a harvest that was. Riley stared, stunned that after such a terrifying night, she was hearing about juice. She stole a glance at Ethan, rocking more fiercely than before. "Why do you keep eyeing him like that?" Grandpa asked, sitting down nearby. "He looks like he's not even here." "That's not so," Grandpa Joe replied with a snort. "It's how he settles himself. When he's quiet and seems to listen, he's lost inside. But acting this way, he's paying close attention. Yeah, Ethan's really," he began moaning mid-thought. "Darn it," Riley thought, then chided herself, enough. She turned to them and said, "I'm heading to the store to call Mom and tell her how things are." She stepped carefully down the hall, noticing ugly cracks in the glass door panes. "What happened here?" "Oh, that's from ages ago. A baseball bat hit it," Grandma said dismissively, serving mashed potatoes from a small white pot. "Really?" Riley blinked and cast a look at Ethan. He twitched harder than ever. "Hey, Ethan, want to tag along with me?" Grandma and Grandpa paused, staring at her. "You want to walk with him?" Grandpa asked. "On your own?" Grandma added. "Yeah," Riley said, swallowing a lump in her throat. What was she thinking? No, this was foolish. Grandpa tapped a chair. Eat first, sit with us, then you can go. Her legs wobbled as she sat, fighting to steady herself. All four of them were there, yet she heard knocking. Someone banged on the wall, but no one else seemed to notice. Only Ethan turned, jerking, looking where she did. He heard it too. She sprang up, ready to flee, but a shadow loomed in the dark hall, gazing at her with that same curious stare. Her legs felt weak as she rose. Grandma and Grandpa were caught up in cooking, their loud voices and sizzling pans masking everything. She leaned over Ethan's chair and gripped the armrest. You see them too? She steadied his shaking head as he turned to her. Huh? Guess that's a yes, she whispered sharply. What are they? He said nothing, twitching more. You don't know? She pressed on. How long have you seen them? What do we do? Run, he mumbled. Run. What did Ethan say? Grandma asked brightly. Run, Riley echoed, then added, them? Who's them? She'd only seen one. She looked up and nearly fell. Another shadow stood in the corner, grinning with flat, square teeth. Its empty sockets fixed on her and Ethan, sending shivers through her. He shouted. Ethan lurched, his chair swaying, but Riley couldn't budge, rooted by the sight. Sit and eat, Grandma said, brushing off the smoke. Why are you stuck there? She walked straight through the shadow, which stopped grinning briefly before fixing its gaze on Riley again. Riley sat numbly, grabbing a spoon. I want to go home. Tears splashed into her plate. They comforted her, Grandpa patting her head, Grandma muttering worriedly, but Riley only saw the grinning shadow, its stare unbroken. They decided Mom would arrive that evening. Train tickets weren't available until the next day, but Riley refused to spend another night here. She insisted they take Ethan too, though he showed no reaction. Since their exchange, he'd gone blank, staring out the window as if something out there captivated him. Riley hid in bed the rest of the day. The shadow wasn't visible from there, hidden by the wall. She didn't dare check if it lingered. She gripped her phone, glancing around warily. Darkness crept in fast as fall dragged the sun down earlier, cloaking the cold earth and dusk. Mom, where are you? Riley called for the 100th time in half an hour, her icy fingers clutching the phone. Almost there, sweetie. Traffic's a nightmare, sorry, Mom said, promising she'd arrive soon. For another hour, Riley unraveled, shining her flashlight even with the lights on. Then the kitchen phone rang. Mom had arrived and asked them to meet her. Grandma and Grandpa put on their shoes while Riley hesitated over her packed suitcase, ready to go. Mom might stop in to chat, but Riley could wait in the car. The door shut with a bang. Holding her flashlight, she lowered her feet to the rug. Before she could stand, cold fingers gripped her ankles. She stifled a scream and pulled free, crashing to the floor. Her suitcase toppled, and she smacked her forehead on the windowsill. Holding the sore spot, she slid back against the wall, watching dark smoke coil under the bed. She glanced over and saw the kitchen shadow still grinning. Ethan stirred again, twitching as he stared at her, forcing out, it. She staggered up with her suitcase and ran to the kitchen, but a third shadow blocked the door. She darted around Ethan's chair and hid behind it. Where did they come from? She shrieked, curling up on the floor. Did you bring them? Ethan tilted his head back. Didn't see, didn't look. They've always been here. Riley's thoughts spun wildly. Always? Had Ethan been seeing these things forever? She raised her head to ask Ethan if they were dangerous, only to meet the grinning shadow face to face. It loomed near, its putrid breath making her gag. Something oozed from it, spreading into the sticky pools she'd seen before. The shadow closed in, drenching her in vile liquid. Nausea surged, but she could only stare, straining to scream. Her mouth opened, yet no sound escaped, not even a croak broke free, just a choke deep inside. The thing's jaws parted, as if it would drain her soul, already lost in its black voids. Riley! She jolted awake, banging her head on the car roof. "Huh," she stammered, blinking at Mom in the driver's seat. "What's going on? How did I get here?" "You're not listening," Mom said, shaking her head. "I was telling you about Aunt Linda. She keeps leaving Ethan with Grandma. I get that she's worn out, but he's her son." Riley tuned her out, groping for any memory. She checked the rearview mirror. A shadow sat in the back, smiling with empty sockets locked on her. She screamed, burying her face in her hands to block it out. But it didn't move or approach, just watched. That stare said everything. It was hers now, bound to her until death. When that would come was another question. Riley flinched and turned as blinding truck headlights roared toward them,